Hello and welcome back to another edition of GNAT-TV's In-Depth series. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Wednesday, July 10th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined today by Sean Sheehan, who is the Director of Elections and Campaign Finance for Vermont. It's division of the Secretary of State's office. Mr. Sheehan is charged with overseeing the administration of elections in Vermont. And of course, we've got one coming up fairly soon, a little over a month. On August 13th will be the state primary. And Mr. Sheehan, it's great to have you with us today. Welcome to GNAT TV.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. Terrific to be here. I was happy to talk to Vermonters.
All right. Well, like I said, we've got the state primary coming up on Tuesday, August 13th. That's where the respective candidates will be, I guess, determined for the ballot in the general election in November. The candidates will be sorted out, Democrats, Republicans, Progressives, Independents, who will be appearing on the November ballot. But as we all know, early people don't need to wait until August 13th to cast their ballots. They can already be voting now if they want. Early voting is underway. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how the early voting process works, just to kind of get us started here. If someone's going to be out of town or wants to vote early or knows who they're going to vote for, what should they do?
Great. Yeah, there's a few things they can do if they're comfortable being online. They can go to the Secretary of State's website or actually directly to a tool we offer called My Voter Page. It's MVP, as in My Voter Page, mvp.vermont.gov. It's really easy to sign in there with just your name, some basic information about yourself, and then you can request a ballot right there. It'll be sent to you. There's other information you can find if you need to update your address or anything else. You can do that from My Voter Page. Otherwise, you can reach out to your town clerk or city clerk in your municipality, and they'll be happy to mail you one. But I went on the My Voter Page myself a couple weeks ago, and that last Saturday, right in the mail came came my came my ballot. So had the instructions right on there. I think one thing to to flag that's a little bit different with the statewide primary as opposed to what we'll be doing in November is there'll be 3 ballots in there, as you referenced in the introduction. There's a Republican ballot, a Democratic ballot, and a progressive ballot. Now you can choose which of those 3 to vote for, but you can only vote one. And so inside that envelope I just showed, there were actually a couple other envelopes as well as three ballots. And what the instructions tell you to do is put 2 unmarked ballots into the envelope marked unvoted ballot, and then you vote the one ballot you choose to, put that in the voted envelope. You put those 2 envelopes in a bigger envelope and you mail it back to the town clerk, or you can drop it off at your town or city clerk. Or as you referenced, I think as you referenced in the question, even if you aren't going to be out of town, but you want more time to study, to research, to chew on, to look at the ballot, you could request the ballot this way, fill it out, vote it, bring it back on August 13th or any time before that when your town clerk is open, and vote that way. Deposit your vote in the ballot box. No matter which way you vote, whether it's in person or by mail or by dropping it off, you do need to vote one ballot and return the other 2 unvoted ballots.
Do you ever get cases where people vote in 2 ballots, or there's some kind of mix-up around that, or is it usually the case that everyone understands the directions clearly and the 2 unused ballots get returned, and the one ballot that's the real one is there, and it's obvious who the person's voting for?
Yeah, usually people get it right, and it's clear. But I think any scenario you can imagine has probably happened and will happen, right? And so the town clerks and city clerks around the state are prepared for any and all scenarios. And if there's any they aren't prepared for, they reach out to our office, and my small but committed staff helps, consult them, refers to statute of what to do. But in the case of the situations you referenced, there certainly are instances where somebody would only return one ballot or may mark a couple ballots. If either of those things happen, the ballot is considered a defective ballot. And that doesn't mean that the person who voted loses out on their opportunity to vote. What it means is the town clerk, the city clerk, would reach out to that voter, let them know they had a defective ballot, give them the opportunity to curing the ballot is the term used in the elections world. What that means is, depending on which scenario they had, they'd be able to come in, specify which ballot they meant to vote, which one they didn't, or mark a new ballot. There's different ways of approaching each, but in short, there's a way to remedy the situation to make sure that the defective ballot isn't counted and that voter is allowed to vote properly.
And how many voters tend to vote early? Is this a growing? I'm assuming it's probably a growing number over the last few years.
Yeah, that's right. It's growing, and it's it'd been growing, say, slowly and steadily. When you look back in the 1970s and 1980s, it was in the single digits. Percentage of all the votes cast in the single digits was absentee. By the 90s, it got into around 10%. In the 2000s, into the teens, and then really it was with COVID and the change there that we've seen actually a majority of votes in the general election in both 2000 and 2022 be cast by absentee ballot.
And is this different somehow from absentee voting, which used to be a way for people who weren't going to be able to make it to the ballot box or the voting booth, the day of the election? Is it any different from that, or that's, as I recall, people would have to go to their town clerk or someone and kind of register that to get an absentee ballot, which they would then return. It sounds like it's pretty much the same kind of idea, though.
It's very similar. The part that's different is in the general election. So if we're talking about the August primary, it's largely similar to how it's been. When we're talking about the November election, everybody receives a general election ballot in the mail, and everybody who's registered and not in the challenged status. And again, obviously for the November election, it'll just be one ballot. It won't be three. Everyone will be voting the same one, but that goes to everyone. So that part's different, and certainly I think can increase the proportion of people voting by mail, or filling it out and dropping it off if they just don't want to wait in a line if they're working on election day in November. But no, you're correct. For August, for the August primary, it's largely similar to how it's been in the past, with, I'd say, some of those developments, as we mentioned, that my voter page and the website that didn't exist decades ago. But so there are things we're doing to use technology to make it easier for people to connect to their town clerk, but they still have the same options of calling or stopping by their town clerk office.
And I want to give you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about that My Voter page in a few minutes. But first, I just wondered, I guess before we get to early voting or absentee voting or whatever, voters also need to register to vote. And if they're not already registered, how soon before the election do they need to register with their town or city clerk?
Yeah, that's one of the great things about Vermont. Vermont offers same day voter registration. So if you aren't registered, you can show up right on election day and register right there and get your ballot and vote. Also, if you're renewing your driver's license with the Department of Motor Vehicles, there's an opportunity to check a box to be registered in that way. Or, as we mentioned, with the My Voter page, you can go to mvp.vermont.gov and walk through the process of of registering to vote right there.
So, you need to be 18 to be eligible to vote, but in Vermont, there are certain situations where people who are not yet 18 but would be 18 by the date of the election are able to vote. I wonder if you could explain that for us, because I, I'm not. I think a lot of people probably aren't very clear about that. So if like, for instance, like if I were 17 again, right now, but I'm going to be 18 by August 13th. Um, I'm okay. I can plan to vote.
Right. Yeah. And actually not just August 13th, actually November 5th. So we met actually a high school student the other last week whose birthday is November 5th, which is election day. So he'll be turning
How
18,
convenient.
right? He'll be turning 18 on election day. If he was born a few hours later on November 6th, he wouldn't be able to vote, but because he turns 18 on election day, he can vote. And as you referenced, he can vote not only in the general election on November 5th, and if he chooses to vote, he'll get that ballot in the mail, obviously when he's still 17, a month or so before his birthday. But in addition to that, Vermont law allows you to vote in the primary for the general election. So in the case of this fellow who turns 18 on November 5th, he can register to vote and request a ballot for the August 13th primary, because he'll be eligible to vote in the general election in November.
And there are certain towns in Vermont, I think Brattleboro is one of them, where if you're 16, you can vote in a local election, like for the school board or a select board or something like that. Is that correct? But that 16-year-old couldn't vote for like a presidential candidate or a statewide office.
That's correct. Yes, Brattleboro did have a charter change to allow 16, as they call youth voters, who are defined as 16 to 18 years old, who can participate in local elections. But as you say, they're not state elections and not federal elections. You have to be 18 for those. So that charter change did require the legislature to adopt it. If you go to the state statutes, you will find town charters, and you'll be able to find that in the appendix of the statute related to Brattleboro's charter. But other than that, it's not something that our office here at the Secretary of State gets involved with, as we help facilitate the state elections and Vermont's participation in national elections.
I was wondering also, what your office or the Secretary of State's office might be doing in terms of trying to increase voter turnout. I mean, obviously, early voting and absentee voting and youth voting is one way of that. But I guess I just wondered, when we think about voter turnout, having covered elections now for a while, it seems like there's a lot of, patting on the back when we get to, like, say, 50% of the eligible voters turn out. That's like considered, wow, great, that was pretty good. But really, when you look at elections in other countries, I'm thinking of the recent election in the United Kingdom, where the voter turnout was roughly 60%, and that was much lower than I guess they typically have. I've usually seen numbers like 75 to 80% of voters that are turning out. I guess I just wondered, what we could do to kind of get up higher than 50% to be kind of the new normal. I mean, is there any way, there's probably no silver bullet for this, but I guess I just wondered any thoughts or thinking you folks might be doing on how we can push that number higher.
Yeah, absolutely. When I think about that question of why people vote, or how do we make voting more appealing, or how do we push that number up, I think of kind of three factors there that can can help. And I think you're absolutely right. There's no magic bullet, but and there may be others out there. But the three I think of is one, really, I think helping foster that culture of voting being both a privilege and a responsibility. Number one, I think number two, making voting more accessible, more possible for people to do, and then thirdly, really seeing that your participation matters. I think when those pieces happen, I think you have higher turnout, higher participation, both within our country and internationally. On that first piece, the privilege and responsibility, I think a lot about, all my grandparents moved to this country. They grew up under British rule. They didn't have the opportunity to, or their parents didn't have the opportunity to vote or participate in that way. So remember, my grandfather, he became a citizen. It was probably the U.S. citizen proudest moment of his life. He knew every president from George Washington to I think Ronald Reagan or whoever it was at that time, could name them all in order, knew all these pieces and never missed an opportunity to vote. And I think in a lot of countries that have higher voter turnout, you do see countries that recently had that, recently gained that right. It's seen as a much more sacred privilege and responsibility. One way that the Secretary of State's office tries to help foster that culture is we do have a communication and outreach team here in the office, which is separate from the division I oversee, the elections division, but obviously we work closely with them, and they go out to fairs. Once we get into fair season later this summer and fall, they'll be out at those fairs, reminding people, helping people register to vote right on the spot. We do have a pretty high registration. About 90% of eligible voters are registered, and in Vermont, so they don't come across a ton of people that still need to register. But in that process is also helping get the word out to people, to not just register, but also to participate. So promoting the My Voter page, promoting the opportunity for people to request a ballot in this primary election is a way to get that word out. After the primary, that team's going to be putting out a voter guide showing all of the candidates who will be on the general election ballot, with those candidates being offered the opportunity to have a statement from themselves linked right from the voter guide, which will be right in the My Voter page. So that will help with people being able to educate themselves about their options of who they're voting for. So I think that privilege, that responsibility being one big piece. I think the second piece, when we talk about making it more accessible, talk about internationally, there's certainly some nations that have election day as a national holiday. And so if people are less likely to have to work and have all their other competing responsibilities, it's more feasible to vote. That's not the case here, but by having same-day voter registration, by having the absentee ballots that anybody can get, that they can get them up to 45 days before the election, that's a way of making voting more accessible here, as well as people who are ill or have a disability. Justices of the peace can take a ballot to people's home if they make that request to their town clerk. We also have accessible voting machines that are in the polling places that people with disabilities can use. So that's another way of making voting more accessible. And then seeing that your vote matters is something that I think we see, when you look at the states that have the highest voter turnout, Vermont actually falls within the top 10, and we might be the only state in the top 10 that isn't a competitive, a purple state, battleground state. States that are battleground states that determine the election tend to have higher voter turnout. So that's something that I think, Vermont and other states that are looking at things like the National Popular Vote Compact and ways to make all states have a say, effectively have a say in presidential elections and otherwise, could help drive up voter turnout. We certainly see higher voter turnout when there's a U.S. senator. You look back at the last 20 or 30 years, that the year that Senator Jeffords retired had the highest turnout for a non-presidential year for a long time before that. And then again in 2022, when we had a number of competitive statewide races, as well as the Senate and Congress race as well. So the more we can do to show that voting matters, and getting across that it's not just those national seats, that actually when you vote, when you get out to campaign at the local level for those local seats and the statewide seats, the state legislature, a small number of votes can really turn those elections and make a difference. So encouraging Vermonters to get active there.
Down here in Sunderland, where our studio is, we had a select board race this past March where it was decided by one vote.
Right. Yeah, those are the stories, right? If you ever need a story to say one vote doesn't matter, you have a race like that to point to.
I wanted to give you a chance to talk about the My Voter page. You've mentioned that a couple of times, and I think that's an important tool and resource for a lot of folks, when they have questions about voting. So they can go to what? Is it mvp.gov? Is that it again?
Exactly. mvp.vermont.gov. Yeah, mvp.vermont.gov. If they go there, the nice thing about it, if you're like me, always setting up usernames and passwords somewhere and then forgetting what your password was and having to go through an arduous process of resetting your password. The nice thing with My Voter page is you don't have to do that. You can sign in just with your first name, last name, date of birth, the town you're registered in, and your driver's license if you have one, last four of the social if you don't. That takes you right in. So you can sign in. From there, you can see your voter registration status. If you're not registered, you can register. If you moved a couple of years ago and forgot to report that to the hadn't changed your license with the DMV yet, or reported it to a town clerk, you'll see, oh, that's my old address on there. You can make that change. Any change or information you put in there can get communicated to your town clerk. So the town clerks in your town in Sunderland, as you say, for you, they administer the townwide voter checklist, and they're responsible for that voter checklist. But we have the statewide checklist that operates off that, and through My Voter page, we're able to help the clerks update their information. We're also able to update it with other information, death records, out of state records that people move, to send those communications to the clerks to make sure that the clerks in those townwide voter checklists have high integrity. But this My Voter page is one way to do that as well. People can get that sample ballot or request that mail-in ballot. Oh, I showed you my ballot before. So if I drop that off, or if I mail that back, my town clerk will then mark that they received my ballot. So if I were to go to My Voter page, if people are worried about mail getting lost or anything like that, I could go to My Voter page a couple of days later and confirm that my clerk got it and that my ballot was received. So it's a great website, a great resource for people to use.
In the couple of minutes we have left, I wanted to ask about ranked choice voting. Also, I believe that's something that may be coming to Vermont. I think in the 2026, or maybe it's the 2028 election, there might. We had a conversation with Secretary of State Copeland Hansis a few months ago. We talked about that. So for the folks who don't know what ranked choice voting is, I guess it's a thing where you select a second choice candidate or a third choice candidate, and if no one candidate wins a majority, those second and third choice votes kick in. But I'm sure I'm not explaining that as precisely as it should be. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about that and kind of where that stands. Is that something that voters here in Vermont will have an opportunity to use in state or federal elections down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to talk about it. And nothing is, confirmed or in state statute yet. So I'll start by saying that it's no official date, but it's gotten a lot of attention and a lot of discussion in the legislature the last few years. It's used in many jurisdictions around the world and here in this country as well. And so it's sure to be taken up in the legislative session this coming January. As you referenced, Secretary Copeland-Hanzas is supportive of ranked choice voting being used in the next presidential primary, the 2028 presidential primary. And so that will be and it seems like there's other support across the legislature too. So I think there's a good chance that will be the election that will emerge from into statute and be the election when it's used. As the way you described it, I think you did a good job describing it overall. It's really set to preserve that principle of one vote per person and allow people to vote for who they really want to win the election, while also voting for their preferences after that vote in case they have a sense of the candidate they're supporting maybe isn't one of the top couple candidates. So as you can imagine, I think thinking about the last time there was the competitive presidential candidate, presidential election here in 2020, when Joe Biden, got the most votes, and Bernie Sanders got the second most, and Elizabeth Warren got the third most, and then you had Pete Buttigieg and a number beyond that. The way it would have worked is, say you had voted for Pete Buttigieg, and all the other there were only 4 candidates to make it simpler than if there were the 12, but the principle is the same. They would have counted all the votes. Nobody would have had a majority. So you would have taken, say, the 5% that Buttigieg had, looked to see of those voters who they had as their second choice. You would distribute those who had Biden as their second choice to Biden, those who had Warren as the second choice to Warren, those who had Sanders as the second choice to Sanders. Then you would look to see, do any of those 3 candidates have a majority yet? And if neither Biden nor Sanders nor Warren did, you would look to see, okay, who has the fewest votes of those 3? And if that was Warren, you would distribute those across between Biden and Sanders, and whoever had the most would be the winner there. So proponents of ranked choice voting really speak to people being able to vote, vote their hopes, not their fears, and that side of it. And you think about it in terms of this presidential election, when a majority of Americans disapproved of President Biden and former President Trump, and yet those were the 2 on the ballot for that exact reason. Either people were most afraid of President Biden and thought that former President Trump had the best chance to beat him, or they were most afraid of former President Trump and thought President Biden had the greatest chance to beat them. This allows for more excitement, more participation. And back to the point I was raising before about those 3 things, about really seeing how your vote can matter and having people feel like they can make a difference. Studies of places where ranked choice voting has taken place shows both higher participation and people feeling better about the election, feeling better about their choices, feeling better about having made a difference. So we're excited to see it, at least to have those conversations this winter in the legislature and see where those go, and hopefully get it in front of Vermonters in 2028.
Yeah, that would be exciting because my understanding is that one of the benefits of the ranked choice voting system is that you tend to get less polarization, for lack of a better term, going on, and there's kind of a better sense, more candidates that are kind of maybe more in the middle of things, or whatever. We could talk about that by itself for at least a good half hour, I'm sure. It's
another conversation for January, right? For now, we're talking about reminding people to get their My Voter page, vote on August 13th, and vote on November 5th, and then we'll worry about 2028 later, right?
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well, again, thank you very much, Mr. Sheehan, for making the time for this conversation. We really appreciate that. Thank you. And good luck with the primary and then the November general election too. I'm sure it's going to be a lot of work, but I'm sure it'll all go well.
It's a busy time, but thanks to all the town clerks and all the other people who help out. And that's actually, when you say a lot of work, I should end on that. If you want to do more than voting, I think reaching out to your town clerk and seeing if they need more volunteers to be poll workers. I know a lot do around the state, and they appreciate that. And a lot of hands make light work. So thank you.
Well, we'll leave it there for now. And thanks again, Mr. Sheehan. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
And thanks to all of you who've been with us today. We hope you enjoyed the conversation. We'll see you again the next time. Meanwhile, take care.